Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Investing Talk podcast. So, have you been watching Silo Pharma lately?
Oh, yeah. They've been definitely making some moves, haven't they?
This stock ticker symbol, SILO, has been on a tear lately.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking almost a 90% jump on January 8th alone.
Yeah, it's really caught the eye of Wall Street for sure.
Okay, so it's more than just a random market spike.
Yeah, I'd say so. Silo Pharma is a biopharmaceutical company, and they're working on some really innovative treatments for mental health conditions. That's a big part of what's driving all this excitement.
Okay, so I was reading about their new patent for a PTSD treatment called SPC15. What can you tell us about that?
Well, this patent is a big deal for Silo Pharma. It basically gives them the exclusive rights to this PTSD treatment for a significant period of time.
So that's big in the pharmaceutical world.
Oh, yeah. It's huge. It really strengthens their position in the market and allows them to focus on developing this potentially groundbreaking therapy.
So for our listeners who might not be super familiar with pharmaceutical investing, can you break down why a patent is such a big deal?
Sure, think of a patent like a protective shield around an invention. In this case, it's SPC15. This shield prevents other companies from copying, manufacturing, or selling this treatment without Silo Pharma's permission. This exclusivity is incredibly valuable, especially when you're talking about a potential breakthrough therapy.
That makes sense. It essentially gives them a head start, right? Like winning the pole position in a race.
Exactly. It allows Silo Pharma to conduct clinical trials, gather data, and potentially bring this treatment to market without worrying about direct competition for a set period. And based on the preclinical data, we've seen SBC15 could be a game changer.
Now, you mentioned preclinical data. For our listeners who are new to this, what does that mean exactly? And what makes SBC15 so potentially game-changing?
Sure. So preclinical data refers to the research and testing that's done before a treatment is tested on humans. In the case of SBC15, the preclinical studies have shown really promising results in terms of safety and effectiveness.
Interesting.
What makes it particularly interesting is its unique mechanism of action. Instead of simply masking PTSD symptoms, it appears to target the underlying neurological pathways associated with trauma. This suggests it could be a more effective and potentially even a curative treatment option.
That's incredible. And they're getting ready to take the next step with the FDA, right?
That's right. Silo Pharma is preparing to file an investigational new drug application, or IND, with the FDA. If the IND is approved, they can move forward with phase 1 clinical trials. That's where things get really exciting because that's when we start to see how the treatment performs in humans.
Can you walk us through what these clinical trials entail and what investors should be looking for as Silo Pharma moves through this process?
Of course. So clinical trials are a critical part of drug development. They're conducted in phases, each with specific goals.
So it's like a step-by-step process to ensure the treatment is safe and effective before it becomes widely available.
Exactly. In phase 1, the focus is primarily on safety. They'll be testing SPC15 on a small group of healthy volunteers to assess how the drug is absorbed, metabolized, and excreted by the body, and to identify any potential side effects.
And if phase 1 goes well,
Then they move on to phase 2, where they start testing the treatment on a larger group of people who actually have PTSD. Here, the goal is to evaluate the treatment's effectiveness and to identify the optimal dosage.
and finally phase 3.
Phase 3 trials are the largest and most comprehensive. They involve thousands of patients and are designed to confirm the treatment's effectiveness, monitor side effects, and compare it to existing treatments or placebos. If a treatment successfully passes all 3 phases, it can then be submitted to the FDA for approval to be marketed and sold to the public.
So there's still several hurdles for Silo Pharma to overcome,
Hmm.
but the potential is certainly there.
Absolutely, and that's what has investors so excited. A successful PTSD treatment would be a game changer, not just for Silo Pharma, but for millions of people suffering from this debilitating condition.
It all sounds very promising. But of course, with any investment, it's crucial to understand the financials. Let's dive into that aspect now. What's the current financial picture of Silo Pharma?
As of January 8th, Silo Pharma's stock closed at $1.73 per share, giving the company a market capitalization of approximately $7.67 million. The stock's 52-week low was back in late November 2024 at 83 cents. So the recent surge is pretty dramatic. They have an average trading volume of around 316,465 shares. But the volume on January 8th was extraordinary. Almost 166 million shares changed hands.
Wow, that's a huge spike in volume. It's definitely getting a lot of attention.
It is, and all eyes will be on their upcoming earnings announcement on March 24th, 2025. That will give us a much clearer picture of their financial health and how their development programs are progressing.
So mark your calendars, everyone. March 24th is a date to watch.
Absolutely. Investors will be looking for details on their revenue, expenses, and cash on hand. These are all key indicators of a company's financial stability and its ability to fund ongoing research and development activities.
Now, we've talked a lot about Silo Pharma and their work on PTSD treatments, but how does their story fit into the bigger picture of the pharmaceutical industry?
That's a great question. The pharmaceutical sector as a whole is projected to have a strong year in 2025. Analysts are predicting over 70 novel drug approvals and an estimated $82 billion increase in sales. This signals a recovery and expansion in the industry.
So there's a positive tailwind for pharmaceutical companies in general.
Mm.
How might Silo Pharma benefit from this broader trend?
If Silo Pharma can continue its momentum with SPC 15, they could be in an excellent position to capitalize on this industry growth. Their focus on psychedelic treatments also sets them apart. It's a unique and growing market segment that is rapidly gaining regulatory acceptance.
I've been reading about how certain psychedelics like psilocybin are showing great promise in treating conditions like depression and anxiety. It seems like there's a real paradigm shift happening in mental health care.
There is. For a long time, psychedelics were stigmatized. But now, with rigorous scientific research and increasing public awareness, we're seeing a change in perception. Regulators are becoming more open to exploring their therapeutic potential. Oregon, for example, has already decriminalized psilocybin, and several other states are considering similar measures. This shift in the legal landscape opens up significant opportunities for companies like Silo Pharma.
So they're really at the forefront of a potential medical revolution.
They are.
Hmm?
And that's a big part of what's driving investor interest. There's a sense that Silo Pharma could be onto something truly groundbreaking, both in terms of patient care and, of course, potential returns.
All right, so we've got innovative treatments, a booming market sector, and a stock that's been soaring. Sounds like a recipe for investment success. But what about the risks? There's always another side to the coin.
You're absolutely right. While Silo Pharma has a lot of potential, it's important to approach this with a balanced perspective. We've seen how volatile this stock can be. That nearly 90% jump was incredible. But it also highlights the fact that Silo Pharma is a high-risk, high-reward type of investment.
So for our listeners who are thinking, should I invest in Silo Pharma, what key factors should they consider before making any decisions?
There are several things to keep in mind. First, Silo Pharma's focus on psychedelic treatments is a major plus. It's a growing market with huge potential, but it's also a relatively new and evolving field.
So there's a lot of uncertainty and regulatory hurdles that they still need to navigate.
Exactly. And their success hinges on the successful development and commercialization of these therapies. There's no guarantee that their treatments will make it through all the clinical trial phases or that they'll be commercially viable even if they do.
So it's a bit of a gamble.
In a way, yes. But with high risk can come high reward. Keep in mind, developing new drugs is a costly and time-consuming process. Silo Pharma is still operating at a loss, and they haven't yet generated significant revenue from their products. Their ability to continue funding research and development depends on their ability to raise capital, either through issuing more stock or taking on debt.
So financial stability is a key factor to watch.
Absolutely. Investors should carefully analyze their financial statements, understand their burn rate, and assess their ability to raise funds in the future. Another factor to consider is the competitive landscape. Silo Pharma isn't the only company working on psychedelic therapies. They're competing with both large established pharmaceutical companies and other smaller biotech firms.
So it's a race to the finish line in a sense.
It is. The company that can develop the most effective and commercially viable treatments will ultimately gain the largest market share.
With all that in mind, what's your overall take on Silo Pharma as an investment opportunity? Is it a buy a hold or a sell?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I can't give investment advice, but I can say the Silo Pharma is a fascinating company with a lot of potential upside, but it's also a high-risk investment. Investors need to do their due diligence, weigh the risks and rewards carefully, and decide for themselves whether it aligns with their investment goals and risk tolerance.
Sound advice. Now, before we wrap up part 1 of this episode, is there anything else that our listeners should keep in mind about Silo Pharma?
I think the key takeaway is this: Silo Pharma is a company worth watching. They're operating in a rapidly evolving and potentially revolutionary field. Keep an eye on their clinical trial progress, their financial performance, and any news or developments that could affect their stock price.
Great insights. We'll be back in part 2 to delve even deeper into Silo Pharma, exploring the regulatory landscape surrounding psychedelic treatments and their potential impact on the company's future.
We'll also discuss their other promising therapies, like the ketamine implant for chronic pain, and provide you with more tools to help you make informed investment decisions.
So be sure to tune in for part 2 of this episode, where we'll continue our exploration of Pharma. And before we go, remember to subscribe to the Investing Talk podcast. Share this episode with anyone you think might be interested, and leave us a comment with your thoughts or questions.
We love hearing from our listeners, and your engagement helps us shape future episodes. Until next time, happy investing.
Welcome back to the Investing Talk podcast. We're continuing our conversation about Pharma, a company that's generating quite a buzz in the world of biopharmaceuticals.
Yeah, you're right about the buzz. And one of the things that has people talking is their focus on psychedelic treatments, an area that's, still somewhat controversial.
Can you shed some light on the regulatory landscape surrounding these types of treatments?
Absolutely. So the regulatory environment for psychedelic therapies is evolving rapidly for decades. These substances were really tightly controlled and largely off limits for medical research.
Right.
But now, thanks to a growing body of scientific evidence that demonstrates their potential therapeutic benefits, we're seeing a pretty significant shift in attitudes both within the scientific community and among regulators.
It's almost like a cultural and scientific paradigm shift.
It is, and Pharma is strategically positioned to capitalize on this evolving landscape. Their commitment to developing psychedelic therapies for conditions like PTSD puts them at the forefront of a potentially groundbreaking field.
We touched on Oregon's decriminalization of psilocybin in the last segment. Are there other indicators that this shift towards acceptance is gaining traction?
Oh, there are. The FDA has granted breakthrough therapy designation to both MDMA and psilocybin for the treatment of PTSD and depression, respectively. This designation basically signifies that the FDA recognizes the potential of these substances to address serious conditions and fast-tracks the development and review process.
So it's not just fringe science anymore.
Yeah.
These therapies are being taken seriously by major regulatory bodies.
Exactly. And this growing acceptance is creating a more favorable environment for companies like Pharma to conduct clinical trials and potentially bring these treatments to market.
Now, even with this growing acceptance, there's still bound to be challenges.
Yeah.
What are some of the hurdles that Pharma and other companies in this space might face as they try to navigate this, complex regulatory landscape?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is the stigma that still surrounds psychedelics. Decades of negative portrayals in the media and strict legal prohibitions have created misconceptions and fears that can be difficult to overcome.
Yeah, like trying to change deeply ingrained cultural perceptions.
Precisely, educating the public policymakers and even healthcare providers about the potential therapeutic benefits of these substances, when used responsibly and in controlled settings is crucial.
So it's not just about the science, it's also about changing hearts and minds.
Absolutely. Another challenge is the need for robust safety protocols. These substances can have powerful psychological effects, so it's crucial to ensure that they are administered in safe and controlled environments by trained professionals.
So the set and setting, as they say in the psychedelic community, is crucial.
It is. Developing standardized protocols and training programs for therapists and clinicians will be essential as these therapies become more widely available. And of course, there are still legal hurdles to overcome. Even with growing acceptance, the legal status of psychedelics varies significantly from state to state and at the federal level. This patchwork of laws creates a complex regulatory maze that companies must navigate carefully.
It sounds like it's going to take a multi-pronged approach involving scientific research, public education, and legal advocacy to truly unlock the potential of psychedelic therapies.
It will, but the potential rewards are enormous. If these therapies prove to be as effective as early research suggests, they could revolutionize the way we treat a wide range of mental health conditions.
So Pharma is playing a long game, betting on the future of this emerging field.
They are. And if they play their cards right, they could be one of the major players in what could become a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Now let's shift gears a bit. Besides their work with psychedelic therapies, Pharma has other irons in the fire, right?
They do. One of their other promising developments is SP26, an innovative ketamine implant for the treatment of chronic pain.
Ketamine. Isn't that an anesthetic used in surgery and sometimes mentioned in a recreational context?
It is. But ketamine has also shown remarkable promise in treating certain types of chronic pain, especially nerve pain. Pharma is developing an implant that would deliver a steady, controlled dose of ketamine directly to the affected area over an extended period.
So instead of taking pills or getting injections, you'd have this small implant that provides continuous pain relief.
Exactly. It's a cutting-edge approach that could potentially revolutionize pain management. The implant would bypass the digestive system and the first-pass metabolism in the liver, potentially reducing side effects and increasing effectiveness.
So it's about targeted delivery and maximizing therapeutic benefits.
Precisely. And it aligns with Pharma's overall strategy of focusing on innovative and potentially transformative therapies.
Now back to the financials for a moment.
Mm.
Earlier you mentioned Pharma's average daily trading volume is around 316,465 shares. But on January 8th, it skyrocketed to nearly 166 million. What's your interpretation of that massive spike?
Well, that kind of volume surge is like a sudden rush of people trying to get into a hot new club.
Aha.
It's a clear indication of heightened investor interest, likely triggered by the recent patent approval for SBC-15 and the growing excitement surrounding psychedelic therapies.
So the market is taking notice of Pharma's potential.
It is, and that surge in volume can also create its own momentum, attracting even more investors who want to get in on the action.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way.
It can be, but it's important to remember that market sentiment can shift quickly. What goes up can also come down.
So don't get caught up in the hype and always do your research.
Exactly. Now, while the surge in interest is encouraging for Pharma, it's important to balance the enthusiasm with a dose of reality. Remember, they're still a relatively young company operating in a very competitive space.
Right. They're not the only ones vying for a piece of the pie in this emerging field of psychedelic medicine.
They're not. And they're facing competition from both established pharmaceutical giants with deep pockets and other up-and-coming biotech companies with innovative approaches.
So it's a high-stakes race to see who can bring these groundbreaking therapies to market first.
It is. And the winners will be those who can not only develop effective treatments, but also navigate the complex regulatory landscape, secure funding, and effectively market their products.
So Pharma has its work cut out for them, but they also seem to have a lot of things going for them.
They do. Their focus on innovative therapies, their strategic positioning in a rapidly growing market, and the recent surge in investor interest all point to a company with significant potential. But as with any investment, there are risks to consider.
We've touched on some of those risks already, but are there any other red flags that potential investors should be aware of?
One thing to keep in mind is that Pharma, like many early-stage biotech companies, is not yet profitable. They're still heavily reliant on external funding to support their research and development activities.
So their financial stability is something to watch closely.
It is. Investors should carefully examine their financial statements, understand their burn rate, and assess their ability to raise capital in the future. Another factor to consider is the inherent uncertainty associated with drug development. Even the most promising therapies can fail in clinical trials or encounter unforeseen regulatory hurdles.
So it's a gamble to some extent. There's no guaranteed return on investment.
Exactly. Investing in a company like Pharma requires a certain level of risk tolerance. It's important to understand that the value of their stock can fluctuate significantly based on news, events related to their clinical trials, regulatory decisions, and overall market conditions.
So buckle up. It could be a bumpy ride.
It could be. But for those who are comfortable with the risks and believe in the long-term potential of psychedelic therapies, Pharma might be a company worth considering.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground in this episode. We talked about the science, the financials, the regulatory landscape, and the risks involved. But before we move on to part 3, is there anything else about Pharma that you find particularly noteworthy?
One thing that I find intriguing is their commitment to patient-centric drug development.
Oh, interesting.
They seem genuinely dedicated to creating treatments that will improve the lives of people suffering from these often debilitating conditions. It's not just about profits for them, it's about making a positive impact.
That's refreshing to hear. It's always good to see a company that's driven by a purpose beyond just the bottom line.
And I think that commitment to patient well-being is something that resonates with investors. You know, people want to support companies that are doing good in the world while also pursuing innovative solutions to challenging problems.
So it's a combination of scientific innovation, social impact, and potential financial returns that's making Pharma such a compelling story.
Exactly. And that's why we're dedicating this 3-part episode to exploring their journey.
In part 3, we'll take a closer look at Pharma's management team, their overall business strategy, and delve deeper into the competitive landscape they face. We'll also provide you with some key takeaways and questions to consider as you evaluate this investment opportunity.
We'll do our best to equip you with the knowledge and insights you need to make informed decisions.
So be sure to tune in for the final part of this episode where we'll wrap up our discussion on Pharma. And remember to subscribe to the Investing Talk podcast. Share this episode with anyone you think might be interested, and leave us a comment with your thoughts or questions. We love hearing from our listeners, and your engagement helps us shape future episodes.
Until next time, happy investing.
Welcome back to the Investing Talk podcast for the final part of our look into Silo Pharma.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? From psychedelics to chronic pain and everything in between.
We've explored their financials, the regulatory landscape, the competition, you name it. But, there's one crucial aspect we haven't really talked about yet.
And what's that?
The people, the team, the folks behind the company.
Oh, right. The management team. They definitely play a vital role in any company's success, especially in a fast-paced field like biopharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
So let's take a closer look at the people leading the charge at Silo Pharma.
Well, from what I've been reading, their CEO, Eric Weisblum, seems to have a pretty solid track record in the pharmaceutical industry.
He does. He's got over 20 years experience in drug development and commercialization. He's held leadership roles at some pretty big pharma companies, and he's got a reputation for being able to bring new therapies to market.
So he's not just a scientist, he's a business leader.
Yeah, exactly. And that's key in this industry. You need someone who can bridge the gap between the science and the market. Someone who can translate complex research into actual products that can help people.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And what about the rest of the management team? Are they equally experienced?
Oh, yeah. Silo Pharma has put together a really strong team of experts, people with backgrounds in clinical research, regulatory affairs, finance, you name it. They've got all the bases covered.
Sounds like they've got a solid crew. But, even with the best team in the world, a company needs a clear strategy to succeed. What's Silo Pharma's game plan? What are they trying to achieve?
Well, their main focus is on developing new and innovative treatments for conditions that don't have a lot of good options right now, particularly in mental health and pain management. They're not just looking for minor improvements. They're after those big breakthroughs, the therapies that could really change the game.
So they're swinging for the fences, huh? Not afraid to take risks.
Exactly. That's clear from their work with psychedelics and that ketamine implant. They're not afraid to push the boundaries of what's possible in medicine.
But pushing boundaries takes money. How are they funding all this research and development?
Like most young biotech companies, they've relied on a mix of private investments, grants, and public offerings to raise capital. And as their therapies progress through clinical trials, they'll likely need to secure more funding to keep things moving.
So investors need to keep an eye on their financials and their ability to raise money. Got it. Now let's talk competition. We've touched on this before, but it's a jungle out there. What kind of challenges does Silo Pharma face from other companies working in these areas?
Well, the race to develop psychedelic therapies is getting pretty crowded. There are some well-funded players like Compass Pathways and MindMed who are already doing clinical trials with psilocybin and other psychedelics. Plus, the big pharma companies are starting to pay attention too. They're investing in research and partnering with smaller biotech firms.
So it's David versus Goliath out there.
In a way, yeah. But Silo Pharma has a couple of things going for them. They're focusing on specific areas like PTSD and chronic pain, and they're not afraid to try out new ways of delivering treatments like that ketamine implant.
So they're trying to find their niche to stand out from the crowd.
Exactly. And their success will depend on how well they can differentiate themselves, execute those clinical trials, and navigate that tricky regulatory landscape.
Well, definitely sounds like they've got a tough road ahead, but also a lot of potential. So as we wrap up this three-part deep dive into Silo Pharma, let's give our listeners some key takeaways.
Right.
What are the most important things to remember about this company?
Well, first off, Silo Pharma has a ton of potential. They're pioneers in a field that could revolutionize how we treat mental health and pain. Their work with psychedelic therapies and that innovative ketamine implant put them in a good position to be a leader in this new and exciting market.
But of course, there are risks too.
Oh, absolutely. Like with any young biotech company, investing in Silo Pharma comes with risks. It's not a sure thing, and the stock price can be volatile. People need to carefully consider the potential downsides as well as the potential rewards.
And remember, everyone, do your own research. Don't just take our word for it or rely on headlines. Look into their financials, read up on their clinical trials, and understand who they're up against before making any decisions.
Couldn't agree more. And just to be clear, we are not giving financial advice here. We're just exploring an interesting company and sharing some insights.
Exactly. Talk to a financial advisor before you make any investment moves.
Okay, so we've talked about their potential, the risks, the importance of doing your homework. Anything else before we sign off?
I think the biggest takeaway is that Silo Pharma is a company worth watching. They're doing some really fascinating work in a field that could have a huge impact on healthcare. Whether you decide to invest in them or not, Their story shows us that innovation and scientific progress can pop up in the most unexpected places.
That's a great point. And who knows, maybe Silo Pharma will be the company that finally helps us to see psychedelic therapies in a new light and unlock their true potential to help people.
That would be amazing. It would be a real testament to the power of scientific curiosity, the entrepreneurial spirit, and the courage to challenge the status quo.
Well, that wraps up our 3-part series on Silo Pharma. We hope you enjoyed it and found it valuable.
And as always, if you like this episode, make sure to hit that subscribe button, share it with your friends, and leave us a comment. We love hearing from our listeners, and your feedback helps us to make the show even better.
Until next time, happy investing, everyone.